Hello and welcome to the Agile Innovation Leaders podcast. I'm Ola Ojako. On this podcast, I speak with world-class leaders and doers about themselves and a variety of topics spanning agile, lean innovation, business, leadership, and much more, with actionable takeaways for you, the listener. Hi, everyone. My guest for this episode is Marsha Acker. Marsha is the founder and CEO of TeamCatapult, and she is a respected and sought-after leadership development expert. And her firm works to equip leaders at all levels to facilitate and lead sustainable behavioral change. This episode is the first of a two-part series because there was just a lot of nuggets to get from Marsha. And in part one, we talked about Marsha's background and beginning, how she got to a cap and she knew that she needed to break through a certain ceiling to get to more, to achieve her potential. She also talked about process-centered versus people-centered transformation and the differences and where each one might be considered. Of course, there is a bias for, and I am biased as well towards the people-centered focus, but there is a place for process. And how you might go about implementing a behavioral-led change. Without further ado, part one of my conversation with Marsha Acker. I hope you find this as insightful as I did. I have with me the very one and only Marsha Acker, who is the founder of TeamCatapult and a coach, facilitator, much known in the Agile coaching and discipline and beyond. Marsha, it is a big pleasure and an honor to have you on the Agile Innovation Leaders podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Ola. I'm super excited to be here with you today. So thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. So Marsha, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I often say my first career was, 2 degrees in software engineering, and I spent some time working with developers, sort of bridging the gap between end users and developers. And so that was my first start. It's actually where I learned about facilitation, was trying to bring whole groups of users together to align on what they wanted in terms of requirements. So it was back before we talked about Agile. It was back before any of those methods and processes had made their way. But that's really where I got my start in facilitation. And then, yes, towards what I call my own retooling around my career was when I actually went to look for professional coaching as a way to up my leadership. I didn't have a desire originally to become a coach. I wanted to do and learn coaching because I wanted to up my leadership. I had reached a point where I was really challenged in my own leadership. And so the very short version of that much longer circuitous path was I found that I did go through coactive coaching. So I started in that space. CTI had a huge impact on me personally. It's responsible for many life decisions that I made coming out of that program. But that was where I got my certification in professional coaching with individuals. And then I went on to do ORSC from CRR Global. And then I went on to do structural dynamics, and that's where I met the work of David Cantor, where I met David Cantor, and we can talk more about that, but that certainly changed my my whole view of how we interpersonal relationships, how we have conversations with one another. It gave me a lens for sort of looking at even some of the previous coach training that I did. So yes, I often say I sort of have two backgrounds. That I think the tech side, I have a soft spot in my heart for techies and people who have a lot of technical and scientific knowledge. And then I often say, then I learned a lot about process improvement and automation and making things effective and efficient. But I think one of the things that I really lacked in the first part of my career was the human skills, like how to work with
Hmm.
other human beings. And I would say the second half of my professional career has been, yeah, how to work with others.
Hmm.
It's a big thing.
Thanks for sharing that, Marsha. Something you said about the
Mm.
second part of your career has being focused on working with humans. Well, I have a technical background in electronic engineering,
Mm.
bachelor's degree, and master's in computer science. And at the beginning of my career, it was more of, okay, what could you do? What's your technical understanding? But as you
Yeah,
move on, it's really more about how to, work well with people and get
yeah,
people to do the best work together.
yeah.
Would you say that's a general
Mm.
trend that you've also observed apart from your own personal
Yeah,
experience?
yeah. I don't know if it's sometimes I wonder, it's maybe just the lens that I look through, or it's the organizations and the kinds of leaders that I somehow attract into my sphere. But I do find myself working a lot with technical leaders. And I think one of the things that happens, um, technical and scientific tracks, we move forward in our careers, we get rewarded for knowledge, for having the answer, for being able to connect and do things quickly. And I think in that career progression, we get really good at knowing the answer, having the answer. We're working with things that we feel like are discrete. We can own them in some way. But as we move up, and I think many, I've talked to many a developer engineer who, sometimes reach that cap, and then the next step is to lead people, to lead others, and to be the senior architect, or to be the senior engineer, the vice president or the director. And it's that famous saying, what got us here won't get us to the next level. And so I think there are those moments. I certainly experienced that. That was one of the reasons I went off to coach training. Was the metaphor I use often is that I was out over my skis. I knew something was like I was trying to make something happen, or I was trying to get things to happen. And my only model for that was because I said so. Like, please do this because uh, I think this is the way. And I started to realize, like, I felt like I was running on a hamster wheel some days, and I'm like, this isn't working,
Hmm.
and I feel like I'm missing something. So I often do find myself working with leaders or leadership teams who are, it's not that they're underperforming, it's just that they've reached a cap,
Hmm.
the place where all that they know and all that they have served them really well up until this point. And then, like, what's required to go to that next level, or to be, effective and efficient in a different kind of way. It's sort of when our focus starts to come off of the very discrete task, and it becomes more about how do we create an environment,
Hmm.
a space, a container for others to be their best. Like, so it's no longer going to be, you know, me making all the decisions or me
Yes.
moving something forward. It's that we need to work together. And boy, that we space is tricky. um, yeah, we are going to see things differently, and there's going to be conflict, and there's going to be difference of opinion. And then,
Hmm.
oh, how do I work with that in a way that's like, I think one of the biggest questions that I think we help leadership teams look at is, how do we work with difference, and actually welcome it rather than try to minimize it. Because I think that's the rub, where if we don't have skills to work with it, we tend to minimize it, or send it out of the room, or suppress it. Like, we say, we don't have enough time for that, or gosh, we've got this deadline. So we become super deadline driven.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes at the expense of having a real conversation with one another.
Gosh, I have so many questions. I don't know which one to ask, but I'll just go with the last, based on what you said, the last few sentences, in terms of not having time. You suppress the
Yeah.
conflict or the differences or the disagreements, because we're always like on a deadline, or we don't have the time for this. So how would you get these leadership teams to, step back and say, you know what, we have to deal with this elephant in the room, or otherwise, otherwise it's going to get bigger, faster. Like if we're to use an analogy of the wound on it, but if you just cover it off with a band-aid, it's not going to get better. Sometimes you have to treat the wound,
Yes.
get the scab off and make it so that it can heal wholesomely and you move forward. So what's your approach for this, please?
So I can tell you how I would have approached it early in my career, in a version of myself that really led with process. So at that time, I had a model for change that was very focused on know the process, like document the process, define the new process, get people to to follow the process. And I definitely, if I kind of laugh about it now, but there was something, it's not wrong. I mean, it worked. So this is very early in my career, early 2000s, because I'd just begun to work with agility. I had left one space where I was a part of a small startup, and I was heading up all of our programs, and we had really started to use extreme programming. So I'm sort of fresh on this thinking of, okay, so there's different ways we can begin to work. And I'd gone into a smaller organization. It was a consulting firm, and we were leading process-led change. And we were working with a leadership team who was really charged with a huge internal transformation effort. And at that time, working directly with that leadership team, like I would have said, we took a very process-centered focus to that. We documented the current process. We helped them. It was over a year of working with this one leadership team. And then we started to help them craft, okay, so what's your desired change, and what would the process under that look like? And as we got towards the end of that transformation, one of the things that I started to notice is that the process-led decisions that the leadership team was being asked to really make some decisions about had a huge impact on people, both them and the staff and the people that they were managing. They cared greatly about their culture and the people. And they reached a place where they just, to describe it, they just dug in their heels and progress wasn't moving forward. And I remember thinking we'd been on retreats with them multiple times. And it was in that moment, that was the moment where I learned and had the insight that there was way more to change than just the process. And what I can tell you now that I couldn't quite articulate back then was that we were missing the people part of this equation. And what was starting to happen is that as the pressure increased and the leadership team was being asked to make decisions that were truly going to impact not only them personally, like where they lived, where their children went to school, family impacts, but that was also going to have an impact across all the folks that they managed. And so they were reaching a place where they just couldn't make that decision kind of collectively. I think one of the biggest mistakes in that particular process was that we were so process-led. And what was missing from it was a coaching perspective and a way to help them have the real conversation, because the real conversation actually started to go out of the room. And I was certainly playing a part in potentially a little unaware at the moment that in favor of wanting to push things forward and get things done in my process-led change model, they were really needing to have a different kind of conversation that wasn't about the process at all. But that had since become the undiscussable topic, and it didn't get brought into the room. So we left it out. So that's an example of an earlier model for change that I had. And I didn't have a way of bringing that conversation online or really even paying attention to it. Now, you asked for how would I do it today.
Yes.
One, yeah.
Because you've said the process-led model for change.
Yeah.
I'm excited to know what the next one is.
Well, and I want to be really clear. I don't think that that's a wrong model, but I think for me, I learned that it was missing something. And I can reflect back now and tell you that. But that's I don't want your listeners to draw to draw any wrong conclusions. That wasn't an overnight insight. Like that definitely took a little bit of time. But what I would say now is I have, in my model for leading change, I think process is important, but it's really not at the core of how I think about change at all. I think it's in my model, it's definitely it's a subtask, but
Right.
I would say I'm very focused on behavioral-led change at the moment. And so in that behavioral-led change, what I place sort of at the center of any change is, how are people communicating with one another? Are they able to actually have the real conversation? Is there enough awareness in the system that they can kind of catch sight of when the real conversation starts to go underground? And can they actually have the muscle, the range in their leadership to catch sight of it and then bring it back in the room? And so I place conversations and behavior kind of at the core of change. And I hold a perspective that no one will change. Change doesn't happen until people feel heard and understood. And I don't know that I could find you an example of any organization that I've worked in, including my own TeamCatapult, where something that we're trying to do or accomplish or move forward doesn't meet a roadblock when some aspect of our conversation isn't fully online, or we're not fully having the conversation that we need to have. So you asked, how would I do? So one of the ways that I would do that today is, first, whenever I'm engaging with a leadership team or any other team that's really trying to bring about change, and just noticing like they're trying to level up, or there's something that they're wanting that they feel like they're kind of capped at, is I just start to help them look at the way they engage in conversation. Because I think in the conversation, there are lots of indicators about how that conversation plays out. And are people really able to say what they're thinking? Or do we get stuck in some common kind of dysfunctional patterns that can show up? So one example of that would be, we use a sort of a technology for looking at conversation. And there are 4 actions that happen in all effective conversations: a move, a follow, an oppose, and a bystand. So a move sets direction, a follow supports it, an oppose offers really clear correction. It says, no, hang on, wait a minute. And a bystand offers a morally neutral perspective. So one way is to help a team onboard that, but there are common patterns. And one of the common patterns that will come out, particularly in tech teams where there's pace and we need to move things forward, is that they can get into this pattern of someone makes a move and everyone else just sort of remains silent, or says something to the effect, might voice sure, that sounds good. Or so they start to fall into this pattern of move and lots of follow. And what's missing often is the voice of bystand, which says, hey, like, I'm wondering what's going on, or I'm wondering what we're not saying, and then really clear opposition. So the ability to bring pushback, constraint into the conversation. So if you go back to that original leadership team that I was telling you about, way back when, I think one of the things that was going on in that team is no one was able to say, this is an incredibly difficult decision, and I don't think I can make it unless I have these things answered. So they kept making it about the process, and it wasn't really about the process at all. It was really, it had a very personal component to it that wasn't being discussed. And so the inability to discuss that really created the drag. So the way that I think about helping any team work through any change is helping them on board the skills of being able to have, we call it bringing, it's a principle that we hold about bringing the real conversation in the room. Can you bring the conversation online versus offline? So the other flag that you might have for when your conversations are going offline is if you feel, I often think about, like, if I leave a conversation with you and I, for example, if I left this conversation and I went off and I felt the need or I was compelled to want to vent or complain about it to someone else, that's my hazard flag that there was something that I was holding back from in this conversation that I didn't say. And that's my signal to actually circle back around. And so maybe I need to check in with myself. Maybe there's something that I left unsaid.
So there we are. This is the end of part 1 of the conversation with Marsha. In part 2 of this conversation, which is the final one, we're going to talk about having effective conversations, what functional self-awareness means, why it's important to slow down conversations in order to get results, as counterintuitive as this might be, and many other things. So stay tuned and watch out for part 2 of my conversation with Marsha. That's all we have for now. Thanks for listening. If you like this show, do subscribe at www.agileinnovationleaders.com. That's agileinnovationleaders.com, or your favorite podcast provider. Also share with friends and do leave a review on iTunes. This would help others find this show. I'd also love to hear from you, so please drop me an email at ola@agileinnovationleaders.com. Take care and God bless.